Have you ever woken up to find footprints circling your house? Footprints that aren't human? I have. And I learned quickly that some visitors don't knock. It started after a heavy snowstorm buried the town in silence. Lauren and Emma had gone to stay with her parents for a few days, and then the storm hit. So Lauren decided to stay until the roads cleared. I thought I'd enjoy the quiet. Instead, it left me isolated and vulnerable. That first morning, I actually felt peaceful. I woke up early, made coffee, and sat by the window watching the snow drift lazily from the trees. There was a stillness outside, the kind that only happens after a storm. No traffic, no wind, just white. I got up to shovel the walkway and driveway, but the moment I stepped into the biting cold, I stopped dead. Footprints surrounded the cabin. Huge prints, twice the size of mine, each tipped with claws that dragged deep lines through the snow. They looped around the house once, methodically, then veered off into the forest behind my property. I stood there staring for what felt like a full minute. The cold didn't matter anymore. My breath fogged the air, and I just kept tracing the pattern with my eyes. One clean circle, no start, no end. I told myself it had to be a bear, even though I knew it wasn't. Bears hibernate. And even if it wasn't hibernating, they don't do that. They don't walk in perfect circles. They don't leave claw marks like those. Still, I tried to forget it. I went back inside, made another coffee, and buried myself in work. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself it had been a fluke, some odd trick of wind and snow. The next morning, the prints came back, and this time, they stopped at my bedroom window. I remember the way my breath caught when I saw them. There, pressed neatly into the snow, was a single set of prints leading from the trees directly to my window. Not around the house, not toward the door, just to the window and nowhere else. I stood frozen, staring out at the woods, certain something was staring back. Not just watching, recognizing me. I set up a trail camera that night, aimed toward the trees, hoping I'd capture nothing. The next morning, I checked the footage, and there it was. A towering figure, gaunt and still, stood at the forest's edge. Its limbs were long and unnatural. Its hollow eyes glowed with reflected light. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just stared into the lens. And then, impossibly, it smiled. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. My breath came in short bursts, shallow and sharp. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a chair, my eyes locked on the thing I'd just seen outside the window. The trail cam image still burned in my mind. That thing had looked straight into the lens like it knew I'd be watching. I reached for my phone, fumbling with shaking hands as I dialed Jake's number. "Jake," I whispered, barely keeping my voice steady. "Something's outside my window. I don't know what it is, but it's watching me." He didn't speak right away. I could hear him breathing on the other end.
"Stay put,"
he finally said, voice low and serious.
"I'm coming over. Don't open the door for anything."
The call ended, and just like that, I was alone again. I checked the window. Nothing. No face. No prints. Just darkness and gently falling snow. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just beyond the tree line, waiting, watching. I sat down on the couch, every muscle tensed, listening. I thought I heard something move outside, a low crunch in the snow, then nothing. Minutes stretched on like an eternity. I kept checking the clock. I don't know how long I waited, just staring at the window, waiting for those headlights to cut through the dark. Finally, they did. Jake's car pulled into the driveway, his headlights sweeping across the cabin and momentarily blinding me. I I rushed to the door and opened it before he even knocked.
You okay?
He asked as he stepped inside, brushing snow off his coat. His eyes scanned me quickly, but before I could say a word, his gaze shifted past me.
Wait!
He said, pointing behind me. I turned slowly. There, just beneath the window, was a single, melting footprint, long, clawed, and soaked in snow that looked wrong, gray, almost black. It hadn't been there before, and now it was bleeding into the carpet. The sight of that footprint snapped something loose in me. It wasn't just the shape of it, or the unnatural size. It was how fresh it looked. Like the thing had been standing there just minutes before Jake arrived. Maybe seconds. Jake crouched beside it, eyes scanning the melting outline. His jaw tightened.
What the hell is this, Evan?
He whispered, voice low and urgent. I didn't answer right away. I was still staring at the blackened slush soaking into the carpet. Something about it felt wrong on a level I couldn't explain. Like it didn't belong in this world. Like it was tainting the floor just by existing. I don't know, I finally said, hollow. I was hoping you'd have an answer. Jake stood up slowly. His face had changed. Not panic now, but something harder. Focused.
We need to figure out what we're dealing with. This thing, it's not just passing through.
We didn't speak after that. We just moved, room to room, checking locks, sealing windows, looking for anything we might have missed. The cabin creaked around us as the wind picked up outside, groaning against the boards like something trying to get in. Every time we finished checking one room, I found myself looking back at that footprint, like it would grow or move. The house felt colder now, heavier. I could swear the lights dimmed just slightly, as if the very air had thickened with whatever that thing had left behind. Jake insisted on staying the night, and I was too shaken to argue. We turned off the lights and sat in the living room, both of us staring out at the forest through the front window. The silence was unreal. No distant cars, no wind chimes, not even the usual creaks of the house settling. Just stillness, like everything was holding its breath. I kept thinking I'd see it again. That grin, those hollow eyes. The longer we sat in the dark, the more it felt like we were being watched, but not from the window, from inside the walls. At some point, dawn came. I hadn't noticed the light creeping in, but suddenly the room wasn't black anymore, just dim and gray, with a faint orange glow behind the trees. We stood slowly and stepped outside. The air was sharp, cold enough to sting. The prints had returned, but this time, they weren't just circling the cabin. This time, they were joined by deep, jagged gouges carved into the wood beneath my bedroom window. Not random, not animal. They formed letters, a message, "Let me in." Jake and I just stood there, staring at the words carved into the wood. My breath plumed in the freezing air, but I barely felt the cold. The gouges were deep, violently made. The way the letters leaned, it almost looked frantic, like something desperate had written them.
It's not going away,
Jake finally said. His voice was flat, not panicked, just resigned.
And it's not asking anymore, it's demanding.
I nodded, still staring at the message. We need help. Someone has to know what this is. Jake didn't argue. He grabbed his keys.
Let's go.
The ride into town was mostly silent. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see something sprinting alongside us through the trees. The tires crunched through snow as we passed abandoned farms and shuttered homes. The storm had hit hard. Most of the town was still buried. We went to the only place we thought might have answers. The library. It looked out of place in the snow. An old stone building tucked behind bare trees, its arched doorway flanked by iron lamps that hadn't been lit in years. It smelled like dust, parchment, and heat that hadn't circulated in a while. Inside, Ms. Fletcher stood behind the counter, cataloging returned books with quiet precision. She looked up as we approached, immediately sensing our urgency. Her gaze flicked between us.
Something wrong?
She asked. Jake didn't hesitate.
We found something. Or something found us.
Her face didn't change much, but her eyes, they sharpened. He told her everything. The prints, the window, the carving. I showed her the trail cam photo on my phone. That was when she changed.
Come with me,
she said quietly. She locked the front door, flipped the closed sign, and led us through a back hallway most patrons never saw. The air grew cooler back there, the lights dimmer. She pulled a key from a necklace around her neck and unlocked a door marked archives. Inside were filing cabinets and shelves filled with local history, weather records, newspapers from the 1800s, journals, and a hidden shelf near the back. From it, she pulled a thick leather-bound book, the kind you'd expect to see behind glass in a museum. Dust rolled off the cover as she opened it gently, flipping through brittle pages of faded ink and strange sketches.
Here,
she said finally, her voice grave. She pointed to an illustration. A thin, towering figure with elongated limbs and black holes where eyes should be. A grin too wide for any human mouth.
the townsfolk used to call it the Winter Reaper.
The name sat in the air like smoke, heavy, ancient. Jake leaned over to look.
What is it? A spirit?
No,
She said softly.
worse. It's something that doesn't belong here. Something that comes when the veil is thin and the cold keeps people quiet.
My throat felt dry. What does it want? She looked at me, really looked at me.
It doesn't just want inside your house.
She whispered.
It wants inside you.
I didn't answer her. I couldn't. The words echoed in my mind long after we left the library. It wants inside you. That's not just hunger. That's possession, invasion, a thing that sees your body as an invitation, your mind as space to rent. Back at the cabin, the air felt colder. Not physically, spiritually, like something had followed us back, riding in on the frost that clung to our coats.
How do we stop it?
Jake asked later that night, sitting across from me in the living room. His voice was raw now, not angry, just tired, beaten down. Miss Fletcher had left us with one final warning and a page from that ancient book, carefully copied by hand.
There's only one record of someone surviving.
She'd told us.
Barely. The entry was fragmented, but it mentioned a ritual. It has to be performed at the base of the oldest oak in the woods, and it must be done at midnight. If you're even a minute late.
She didn't finish the sentence, just looked down, so we prepared. We laid everything out on the kitchen table, coarse salt, stubby white candles, the copied sigils. Jake sharpened a hatchet, just in case. I triple-checked the time on every clock in the house. The hours dragged. When night fell, we left the cabin behind and stepped into the woods. Every step deeper into the trees felt like a commitment. The world faded behind us. It was just us, our flashlights, and the endless dark. Ms. Fletcher's directions weren't perfect. We got turned around once, maybe twice, but eventually we found it. The oak. It towered above us like something fossilized. Its bark looked scorched, twisted. Its limbs stretched upward like they were trying to claw their way out of the earth. We cleared a space at its base, laid the salt, placed the candles, drew the sigils into the snow, our hands trembling from more than the cold. When Jake lit the last candle, the wind stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Even the trees stood still, frozen mid-sway like they were waiting. I checked my watch. 11:59. We stepped into the circle. I held the paper tightly, words etched in spidery script. My eyes could barely focus. My breath came out in clouds. And then, from somewhere behind the trees, a sound began. A howl. Not quite animal, not quite human. It rose and fell like it was circling us. Branches snapped, snow crunched, and then I saw it. The Winter Reaper emerged from the darkness like it had always belonged there. Its limbs unfolded slowly, unnaturally. Its eyes glowed faintly in the candlelight, and its grin, it wasn't smiling this time, it was snarling. I forced myself to start the chant. The words were thick on my tongue. They felt like ash and ice, like they burned and froze as they left my mouth. The creature stopped at the edge of the circle. Its claw hovered above the salt. It hissed, a sound like steam and bone cracking, and flinched back. I kept going, louder now. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. The candles flared. The circle glowed. The Reaper threw back its head and screamed, a sound so violent it shook snow from the trees. Then it recoiled. Its form shimmered, twisted, like it was being pulled apart by something unseen. And then, gone. Just silence. Jake collapsed onto his knees, gasping. I stood in the middle of the circle, panting, the paper still clenched in my fist. The snow around us was untouched, like nothing had happened. But we knew better. We walked back in silence, flashlights cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. By the time we reached the cabin, dawn was beginning to bleed over the horizon. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. Jake said nothing as he packed his bag. He left with a promise to check in, but I knew he wouldn't be back anytime soon. And me? I'm still here. I keep the sigils taped to every window. The salt circle around the cabin is redrawn after every snowfall. I don't sleep much anymore, because I know the truth. You can banish something. You can send it away, but that doesn't mean it's gone. Some visitors never truly leave. If this story left you watching your windows a little longer tonight, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode of my personal stories. And tell me, if you saw footprints in the snow outside your bedroom window, would you dare look out? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching Cabin of Whispers. See you next time.